In the evening, when the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting its last shadows on the old walls of the abandoned school, the three friends stood by its rusted gates. "You sure this is a good idea?" Lisa whispered, feeling a chill creeping up her spine, even though the air was warm. Martin, the only one with a flashlight, turned around and smirked. "It's just a school, Liza. No big deal." But it felt like the school itself was watching them through its empty windows, like eyes filled with darkness and old pain. As soon as they stepped inside, the air thickened, and every sound, whether it was the creak of the steps or the rustle of peeling plaster, echoed in the stillness. Lisa gripped Tom's hand tighter, who, just like her, was trying to hide the shiver running through him. "You hear that?" Tom suddenly whispered, and they all froze. On the edge of hearing, a distant child's laughter drifted through, like it was coming from behind a thick, dusty curtain. They exchanged looks. Martin, who seemed the most confident, pointed the flashlight down the hallway. The light barely illuminated rows of old lockers and a classroom door where the faint remnants of a name remained: Miss Johnson. "Someone's definitely been here recently," Martin muttered, pointing to the smudged handprints on the dirty glass. But the school had been abandoned for over 20 years. There couldn't have been any kids here. For a second, in the dim light of the flashlight, something flashed in the far end of the hallway. A small figure that moved so fast, Martin thought it was just his imagination. "You see that?" Tom asked, his step faltering. But Lisa was already clutching his hand tighter, her eyes locked on the same spot. They slowly approached Miss Johnson's classroom, and Martin, fighting his own trembling, cracked the door open. The room looked like class had just let out. The chalkboard still had an assignment written on it, almost faded beyond recognition, and there were broken desks scattered around. On one desk, a notebook lay open, covered in neat but childish scribbles. Lisa slowly walked up to it, her hands shaking as she flipped through the pages. "We're stuck. Miss Johnson won't let us go home." At the end of the page, there was a dirty smudge, like a small, dusty hand had left a final mark. "How is that even possible?" Tom whispered. But as soon as he said that, the light in the hallway flickered, like something dark had blocked it. In that moment, they heard a weak, pleading whisper. "Don't leave." The notebook slipped from Lisa's hands, and in the doorway, shadows appeared, figures that looked like kids, standing still and staring at the uninvited guests with hollow eyes. Lisa, Tom, and Martin froze, staring at the blurry, almost transparent silhouettes of kids in the doorway. Lisa instinctively took a step back, but one of the kids, barely visible in the dim light, raised a hand, almost like begging. "Help us," the whisper echoed through the room, followed by a scream of pain and desperation that shook the walls. Tom frantically tried to turn on the flashlight again, but the light flickered out, leaving them in the dark. Suddenly, all three of them felt like they were being pulled into another world. The school walls vanished, and they found themselves in a completely different scene. They were standing in a classroom full of kids who were anxiously staring at their teacher, Miss Johnson. "Fire," Lisa whispered, seeing smoke filling the halls. The kids were running around, screaming, trying to get out, but Miss Johnson stood by the door, blocking it and begging them to calm down. "We won't leave this place. We'll stay together, forever." Her voice sounded weird, unnatural. Then it hit Lisa. Miss Johnson had made a terrible mistake. Overwhelmed with fear and panic, she didn't want to let the kids go, even when it was clear that leaving the classroom was dangerous. And so the children's souls got trapped with hers, forever staying in this forgotten building. The school suddenly snapped back to its usual shape, as if the vision had disappeared. But Lisa, Tom, and Martin knew that what they'd just seen wasn't some hallucination. It was a memory, imprinted in the walls of the school. Tom exhaled in shock. She didn't let them go. She wanted to keep them forever. "We got to do something," Lisa said firmly, trying to ignore the whispers coming from somewhere behind the door. She turned around and froze. In the corner of the classroom, barely lit by the street lamp outside, was the figure of a woman in an old-fashioned dress, holding something in her hands. "Did you come to take my kids from me?" Miss Johnson's voice was cold and distant, but there was a hint of fear in it. She seemed to be stuck between worlds, trapped in the endless loop of her fatal decision. Lisa gathered her courage and spoke, not taking her eyes off the ghostly figure. "We want to help you, and your students. They don't need to be here anymore. Please let them go." For a second, regret flickered in Miss Johnson's eyes, but then her face twisted, and she stepped forward, glaring at them with fury. "You don't get it?" Her piercing voice echoed through the room. "I was protecting them. I was their last hope." In that moment, the shadows of the kids appeared behind her again, almost like they were repeating every step she made. Their faces looked desperate, reaching out to the heroes for help. Martin, struggling to keep his fear in check, whispered, "She doesn't get it. They're stuck here because of her." Tom reached out, almost like trying to reach the woman, who, even though she was just a shadow, still clung to her decision. "You don't want them to suffer? They want peace, Miss Johnson. They need a home, but not here. Please let them go." The woman hesitated, looking at the kids who were frozen in silence. She whispered, barely audible, "They're still my kids, but if this is for their good." While Miss Johnson was still unsure, Lisa noticed an old, worn-out book on the teacher's desk with yellowed pages, like it had been left here years ago. She opened it and found a page with notes in the margins. A spell that bound souls to this place, keeping them here forever. "This is a ritual," Lisa exclaimed, showing the find to her friends. "If we say this spell backward and burn the book, maybe we can break the connection." Martin pulled out a lighter, and though his hands were shaking, he set the edge of the page on fire. As he did, Miss Johnson's spirit rushed toward them, almost like she realized what they were about to do. Mess with her eternal hold on the kids. "No, you don't get what you're doing," she screamed, and the kids' shadows started moving wildly, like they were trying to break free from her control. But Lisa started reciting the spell backwards, feeling the air in the room lighten with every word. Miss Johnson kept yelling and begging them to stop, but her figure was getting fainter. The kids' shadows reached out toward the light now hovering over the burned book. Finally, when the book turned to ash, Miss Johnson's figure dissolved into the air, and with her, the kids' shadows disappeared. The last thing they heard was a relieved giggle, like the souls had finally found peace. Once the book was gone, everything around them seemed calm, but Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over yet. Something gleamed in the corner of the room. She moved closer and found a worn medallion, its look sparking a warm but strange feeling, like it was familiar. Suddenly, a vision flashed before her eyes. In the dark school hallway, a girl who looked just like her, with blonde hair like Lisa's, was running, glancing back like she was being chased. At one point, she turned and said, "You have to help me," and vanished. Lisa flinched, realizing that the girl in the vision looked like her aunt, the one her grandmother had told her about years ago. She had gone to this school and disappeared, leaving a mystery for the whole family. Martin and Tom noticed her shock. "Are you okay?" Tom asked, but Lisa just nodded, feeling the weight of the past pressing down on her. Meanwhile, as they were still looking at the medallion, Martin started acting weird. He walked over to an old desk, sat down like he was in a trance, and whispered words they couldn't understand. His eyes were empty, his stare distant. Tom tried to snap him out of it, but Martin shoved him away violently. "That place wants to keep him here," Lisa whispered, realizing that the school was slowly swallowing him up, just like it had swallowed her aunt and all the kids before. Suddenly, Lisa heard a voice coming from the pendant. "Martin can't stay here. Find the room with the Forgive Us sign. That's where it all started, and where it will end." The pendant dimly glowed, almost like it was trying to point the way. Lisa and Tom, trying to bring Martin back, headed to the room where the tragedy had happened. They struggled to bring him around, and the three of them stepped through the door. Before them was a scene from the past. Miss Johnson and her students, all the ones who died that night. But among the kids was Lisa's aunt. Her soul had gotten stuck here because of her attachment to the place. The girl reached out to Lisa, passing on her strength to complete the ritual. Lisa, determined, spoke the words the girl had whispered, releasing all the souls, including her own. In that moment, the shadows disappeared, and Martin snapped back to reality, the long-awaited silence settling in the classroom. As Lisa finished the last words of the ritual, a light breeze seemed to pass through the room, and the air turned unusually fresh. Martin finally came to, looking at his friends in confusion, as though waking from a deep sleep. What happened?" he mumbled, still not fully grasping what had just gone down. Lisa, trying to hide the tremor in her hands, glanced at the pendant. It now felt brighter and heavier, as if it carried the gratitude of all the freed souls, including her aunt's. She felt warmth spread through her body, and in her mind a quiet whisper. "Thank you, Lisa. I'm free now." Her eyes welled up with tears, and she pressed the pendant to her chest, knowing that part of her family had finally found peace. "We did it," she whispered, smiling through her tears, and Tom gently put his hand on her shoulder, also feeling a deep sense of relief. Martin watched them, then turned his gaze to the empty, finally quiet room, as if remembering everything that had just happened. Around them, the light began to change. The room, once filled with shadow, was now bathed in soft sunlight streaming through the old window frames. The air felt lighter, and the atmosphere of fear and sorrow had vanished, like the school had finally shrugged off its long burden. Lisa walked to the window, opened it, and took in the cool, fresh air. The shadows of the children who had once been trapped there no longer bothered her, and she knew their souls had found peace. She looked at her friends and smiled, saying, "Time to go. We've got nothing left to do here." The three friends left the school in complete silence. Lisa glanced back one last time, feeling a soft touch on her shoulder, as if some invisible, dear presence was saying goodbye. She squeezed the pendant tighter, knowing it was the final gift from her aunt, a gift that would stay with her forever. When they left the school grounds, leaving behind its mysterious past, Lisa felt like she had let go of not just her aunt, but something more, the secrets and shadows that would never haunt her again.